Don't you just hate it when someone walks up to you and assumes they know everything about you based on one or two things? Tell me your favorite game, and I'll tell you what I think it says about you. Whether my assumptions are right or not are completely irrelevant. The medium is not you, and you are not it. Similarly, video game devs, while being a game's creator, are not the game itself. Just because I make something for others to enjoy does not necessarily mean I am that one thing. But, unfortunately, there are people out there who disagree. They believe that all works of fiction, art, or creation of any form must, without a doubt, hold open a window into the nature of the designer's soul, and that, by looking through that window, they can somehow gain to learn more about the author, designer, director, etc. But that's their first mistake. What if something isn't made to be known? Isn't made to be seen or interpreted? What if it was just made for fun? Let's talk about the beginner's guide. As the announcement trailer would show you,
let's say you sit down at a stranger's computer. You start opening up files and looking through stuff, and eventually you come to a folder that just says My Work. So you open it, and you click on a random file, and it's a video game that looks like this. Hi there. Thank you very much for playing the Beginner's Guide. My name is Davey Reedon. Today, I'm going to tell you about a series of events that happened between 2008 and 2011. We're going to look at the games made by a friend of mine named Coda.
The Beginner's Guide isn't much of a game, so much as a collection of passion projects strung and tied together for the sake of our enjoyment. And despite them all being visually incomplete, our narrator Davey seems to believe there's some deeper meaning to ascertain. That by analyzing all the minute little details, we can begin to learn more about the indie dev, Coda, through his work without ever actually knowing him.
This is what I like about all of Coda's games. I mean, not that they're all fascinating as games, but that they are all going to give us access to their creator. And I have to be honest with you, this idea is really seductive to me. That I could just play someone's game and see the voices in their head and get to know them better and have to do less of the messy in-person socializing. I could just get to know you through your work.
The game is an hour-and-a-half story of self-reflection. Davey guides us through 17 levels of unfinished games, with each one varying in weird and abstract concepts. With every level we play, we see him define to us what his interpretation of everything might mean about not only Coda, but the games themselves.
It's a lamppost. Okay, I can't tell you quite why, but for some reason Coda fixates on this lamppost. It's going to appear at the end of every single one of his games from here on out.
As Davey does this, however, he never learns to separate the art from the artist. He continually feeds us the narrative that Coda is depressed, reclusive, breaking down, and it's all right there for us to see, unraveling through his work.
Either way, to me they convey a sense of loneliness. I see this person who's filled with thoughts and feelings and beliefs and has no way to express them except as scattered and unheard voices in a game that wasn't meant to be played.
The visuals, ethereal music, and lack of substance in every level, paired with Davey's interpretation of it all, it's hard to come to any other conclusion.
And in person, he was being a lot more distant than usual. Like, you know how sometimes a person will just deflect anything that you say in order to keep themselves disconnected all the time? It was that kind of thing. Here was the point in my relationship with Coda where I really started to wonder if he needed my help in some way.
So, Coda was depressed, without any second thoughts. That's what I was told.
Now, put yourself in my shoes playing this. Here's a friend whose work is exhibiting signs of struggle, frustration, anxiety, depression, even. And yet, still, he keeps making games. He keeps throwing himself into the grinder even when he clearly doesn't have the energy for it anymore. Why? What is it for? Because from my perspective at the time and just what I knew of him, this was a result of how isolated he was. I was watching him do this to himself, and I hated it. I hated seeing him so trapped. This is someone I really cared about. And I used to get so much joy out of seeing him create. For him to suddenly become angry and frustrated like this, it was the worst thing for me.
My wife and I had been playing the game together, and while sharing several concerned glances back and forth, We too were worried for Coda by the end, because we had been conditioned to worry for him. There's a twist that we'll talk about in just a moment, because it wasn't apparent to me how deep that twist ran until I played the game again.
In retrospect, I think I was probably a bit too pushy, trying to get his attention. I was over-enthusiastic. But he was very gracious about it and very patient with me. And I cooled off eventually.
I think Davey became obsessed with Coda from the moment they met.
Now, these games mean a lot to me. I met Coda in early 2009 at a time when I was really struggling with some personal stuff, and his work pointed me in a very powerful direction. I found it to be a good reference point for the kinds of creative works that I wanted to make.
There's an old saying by Federico Fellini that goes, "All art is autobiographical. The pearl is the oyster's autobiography," meaning that everything you make for others' enjoyment tells a story about you. Hence my earlier question, what if that story is never meant to be read? Throughout the beginner's guide, there's only 3 instances of Davey mentioning how he had access to Coda's works.
And so we just got into heated arguments over it, and there was one time that after one of these conversations, he went home, and a day or two later, he sent me a zip file entitled Playable Games that was full of hundreds of individual games, each of which was just an empty box that you walked around in and nothing else. This was actually the first game of his that I ever played. This was shortly after I met him at a weekend game jam in Sacramento, where I grew up. Of all of his work, actually, this was the only one that he called me up to ask me to come over and look at it.
Despite these 3 instances, Davey somehow has access to all 17 of Coda's projects. Let's take another look at that announcement trailer.
Let's say you sit down at a stranger's computer. You start opening up files and looking through stuff.
Everything we've been shown is an invasion of privacy. Davey claims to have met Coda in 2009, and yet...
So, it's 2008, Coda starts making these games, and he never releases any of them. He doesn't put them onto the internet, he just makes them and then immediately abandons them, and they sit on his computer forever.
So, Davey makes it no secret that he loves Coda's works. Despite that work not being anything more than simple walking sims, Davey feels a connection so deeply personal that when Coda begins making games about prison, or eventually falls into a creative slump, Davey interprets that as depression and self-isolation, seeing Coda as having problems he could fix.
I'm thinking that Coda's stuck in his own head, and that it's having a very negative effect on him, and that all he needs to do is just start showing his work to people, to get some actual feedback on his games. It might get him out of isolation. And so, as I'm thinking this, I realize that I could be the one to initiate it. Because it would never occur to Coda to start actively soliciting feedback, so what if I did it for him? If he could see the difference it would make to have more actual conversations with other human beings, would that bring him out of his mental spiral? Would it give him confidence in himself? Would it bring meaning back into his work? So I started showing Coda's work to people. I took this one.
Not only did he show Coda's work to people, but he altered it, tainted it. He gave what he interpreted to have meaning to something otherwise meaningless, against Coda's wishes. The versions of these quote-unquote games aren't even the original builds, because whatever didn't fit the narrative Davey heard in his head about Coda, he disregards as unexplainable, pointless, skips over it entirely, or even modifies the games to make them playable.
There's really no reason for it that I've ever been able to discern, so in the interest of time, I'm just gonna skip you on past it. So why, if Coda's not showing these games to anyone, why bother opening the door at all? Well, to show you, I'm modifying the game here. Alright, now I'm going to modify the game again. In Coda's original design, the door stayed shut for a full hour before letting you go. If you don't mind, I think we're gonna skip that. And to be fair, it's not like this is the first game that's needed some modification to be playable. Like the house cleaning game. You know, that one used to actually loop the cleaning chores and you just cleaned a house forever. I had to cut it off so that you could exit the house and the game would actually end. But that game had an idea that it was actually trying to communicate. What's the deeper idea behind the invisible maze?
There are 3 dots scattered throughout almost every game he shows us. They're not hidden or hard to find, they're just there. They serve no purpose or in-game functionality. There's no plot to connect them to or big reveal. They're just there in almost every game Coda makes. Yet Davey doesn't comment on them until the last game, where he begins to experience an emotional breakdown.
I had been trying to, though. That was the thing. For years, I was trying to get to know him, to understand who he actually was and what he stood for. I asked him so many times to please just tell me what his games mean to him. I asked him please to tell me what the 3 dots mean. And he wouldn't. I just felt so strongly that if I could have connected with him, that if I could have somehow made his work my own, that I would finally be once and for all happy. It was that I needed to see myself in someone else. I needed to be someone other than me. But he stopped and left, and it felt somehow like I had failed.
Davey didn't just like Coda's work. He built a pedestal for him.
I fell pretty hard for this one. I feel like it's one of the most relatable experiences that you can have. To assume that some other person is perfect and totally fulfilled in every way, and completely miss all of the little flaws that make them painfully human. I think about this game a lot these days.
So let's circle back to my earlier question. What if a story isn't meant to be read? Well, if none of these were meant to be interpreted, how do you analyze when something is made intentionally, yet wholly different from all of its predecessors? When something doesn't fit the narrative you've crafted so perfectly? The answer is that you can't.
So this is June of 2011, and I didn't hear anything from him for several weeks, I guess. And so out of nowhere, one day I get an email, and it's got a private link to a new game of Coda's. This one is called The Tower, and to my knowledge, it's the last game that Coda ever made.
When Coda realized what Davey had done, violating his privacy and altering the one thing that gave him comfort, he crafted their project exclusively for Davey and quit game development altogether.
I remember, it's June of 2011, I'm playing this for the very first time, and as I'm playing, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know this person. I have no idea who this person is.
Coda had made a game so unplayable that it could only be beaten by tampering with the game's code. Invisible mazes that hurt the eyes, a 6-digit code that you have to guess, and finally a closed-off room where the only switch to escape must be pressed from the outside.
The game goes beyond not being meant to be played, it actually seems to despise the player for trying to play it at all. And it's scary for me, the idea of Coda cutting himself off entirely. Just saying, that's it, that's the end of the conversation, not giving me any way to fix the problem. I feel like a failure, I guess, when I can't fix the problem.
Davey doesn't learn his lesson, however. He continues to tamper with the game until he reaches the end and finally finds what he's been looking for. A message from the developer.
I'm the reason that you stopped making games, aren't I?
Dear Davey, thank you for your interest in my games. I need to ask you not to speak to me anymore. I wonder at times whether you think I'm making these games for you. You've so infected my personal space that it's possible that I did begin to plant solutions in my work, somewhere hidden in between games. If there was an answer, a meaning, would it make you any happier? Would you stop taking my games and showing them to people against my wishes? Giving them something that is not yours to give? Violating the one boundary that keeps me safe? Would you stop changing my games? Stop adding lampposts to them? Would you simply let them be what they are? When I'm around you, I feel physically ill. You desperately need something, and I cannot give it to you. I literally do not have it. Struggling to come up with new ideas is not making me depressed. Low points are just part of the process. The fact that you think I'm frustrated or broken says more about you than about me. I realize this doesn't make sense to you just yet, which is fine. You're not my problem to solve. But I do hope that one day it clicks, and that you make peace with this thing you're wrestling. And when you finally see what I'm talking about, don't say anything. There are two sides to every story, and unless you're told what the author's planning from the start by the author, you'll never be able to interpret intention. I feel like we can apply this type of logic to even the most extreme of circumstances. Take Metal Gear Solid, for example. The entire series spans off of one soldier's dream for a peaceful world, and another soldier's horrific interpretation of that dream. The boss is not someone that's talked about often. In fact, when you say the boss, most casual fans of Metal Gear immediately think of Big Boss, despite them being wholly separate characters. She's mentioned in countless audio logs, and her ideology influences the world into what we see today. And yet she only appears in one game out of a series that spans 30 years. And that's the same game that she dies in. Stick with me here, it'll make sense soon, I promise.
Why'd you defect?
I didn't. I'm loyal to the end, to my purpose. What about you, Jack?
Before the boss is killed at the hands of her best friend, she explains to him that she was the first person to ever see the Earth from space. Top secret and off the record, of course. Only our government's top elite knew the truth about it. Once she was in orbit, she saw the world for what it was. A single, solitary body, and all of its residents unified in a world without borders. Her dream was that everyone would realize this by the 21st century. All our politics and economics were all just means to the same end. Global peace in a world where friends wouldn't be forced to become enemies. She told Snake of her goals, but not how she planned to achieve them. Snake, Zero, and even Skullface all attempt to realize her ambition in terrifying ways. Snake amasses an army without a country to serve. Zero builds AI machines to govern the world in the boss's image. Skullface attempts to eradicate the English language entirely, believing that the boss wanted the world to be silent. And every single one of them sought out nuclear weapons. Clones, hypnosis, and even child soldiers happen as a result of their actions, all for the sake of realizing a dream that was not their own. During his original mission, at any given moment the boss could have killed Snake, or explain what was happening to her and convince him to defect. But instead she chose to follow her orders. Her intention was to remain a soldier till the end, to die for the country that betrayed her and to make sure it was Snake that dealt the final blow. That was her final mission. Her will was never meant to be rendered by anyone that knew of it, and it wasn't until decades later that Snake realized that.
You were right. Oh, it's not about changing the world. It's about doing our best to leave the world the way it is. It's about respecting the will of others and believing in your own.
Similar to how Snake employed an army of people for the boss, Davey employs everyone that buys the beginner's guide.
That's why I'm releasing this collection of your work, is because I haven't been able to find any other way to reach you. I've tried everything. And so a part of me has hope that if I put this compilation out into the world, and if I put my name on it, that maybe enough people will play it so that it'll find its way to you, so that I can tell you that I'm sorry. I know I screwed up. If I apologize to you truly and deeply, will you start making games again? Please, I need to feel okay with myself again. And I always felt okay as long as I had your work to see myself in. I mean, is something wrong with me? Because I know that I did an awful thing, and I'm doing it again right now. Like, I'm showing people your work, but I can't stop myself from doing it. That's how badly I need to feel something again, like I'm an addict. There has to be something wrong with me. Can I apologize? What if I tell you I was wrong? Will that work? Will that fix it? I don't know. I don't think it will, but there's nothing else that I can do. Just tell me what you want. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, start making games again. Please help me. Please give me some of whatever it is that makes you complete. I want whatever that wholeness is that you just summoned out of nothing and you put into your work. You were complete in some way that I never was. I want to know how to be a good person. I want to know how not to hate myself. Please. I'm fading, and all I want is to know that I'm going to be okay.
Snake helped plunge the world into war and chaos. Davey continued to show people Koda's work, believing it would bring him happiness at Koda's expense. Both protagonists, although vastly different in scale, genre, and personality, ultimately wound up becoming the villains of their own stories, both for the same reason. You cannot interpret intention. In the end, Davy realized this, all too late.
I guess if someone had told me ahead of time that he just really enjoyed making prison games, maybe I wouldn't have thought he was so desperate. I wouldn't have told so many people that he was depressed. Maybe he just likes making prisons.
Following his emotional breakdown, Davy leaves us to finish the final game on our own. No more deductions or comments as we walk through a train station and then somehow find ourselves transcending the Earth, high enough to see the world in all its complexity. What does any of it mean? Maybe we'll never know. This game is such a powerful experience and one that I recommend everyone play. It can be deciphered in so many different ways it's mind-boggling to think about. But maybe you shouldn't play it. It was never meant to be played.
Turn back. Turn back from this cave. You said, let me prove that I'm brave. Let me keep going. But the cave goes for miles and miles and miles, and you're so